Everyone, I think we are now live, so we can make a start of the audit committee this evening. We've got quite a packed agenda. We've got some members in the room. We're corporate here. We've got members who've joined. We've got officers here and also joining virtually. We've got a packed agenda. So I've actually got timings for each item. So I will have to hurry on some of the items, and we can take questions outside of the meeting and publish anything if so required. I think our goal really is to work through the agenda this evening, so we can avoid having sort of an extra meeting in March. So if you'll do myself and officers that favour this evening, I think that would be really appreciated. So I think and we've also got some exempt items which we'll cover at the end of this evening's agenda. So without further ado, are there any apologies for the minutes?
Yes, there's apologies for absence from Councillor Harvinder Singh Verdi, who's joined by Zoom. Laney is also joining by Zoom.
Brilliant. Any declarations of interest? Any online either? Minutes from the last meeting. Any comments on those, or can we take those as agreed? And as is always the case, only those physically present can actually vote on anything substantive. Any comments?
Agreed.
Agreed on those. Right, action log. Series of actions that have been supposed to be closed there on page 19 of the agenda pack. Have a look at those, but I think all of those can be effectively closed. Familiarise yourself with them just 1 second, and then I think we can agree that those might be closed.
AC 114, we have to take a decision on that, isn't it? And one from
that is at this evening's, that's on the agenda as item 6, I think. So
that, yeah.
we're fine to close that one, I think. Can we agree to close all of those actions?
Agreed.
Yeah. Okay, so next we turn to the Auditor's annual report, and I just sort of remind members in a way that, in a sense, we've seen a lot of this material. It shouldn't be any new material as such. It's just a repackaging in terms of the Auditor's annual report. So I don't actually suspect we'll need a great deal of time on this. I would like to introduce our new auditor, Stephen Reid from EY, and welcome him as the new audit partner for EY. But can I pass over to officers first for any observations? Or
thank you, Chair. I'll speak to this if that's okay. There was a very brief covering report, as you said. It's the annual audit report. It's consistent with the information that you have seen before. We're pleased that you can meet the new audit partner, Stephen Reid, in just a moment as well. I think there was one correction to the covering report that we probably should make you aware of, though. Menya, do you want to come in on that? So.
Yeah, in paragraph 3.5, I do apologise. I erroneously said that Janet Dawson managed both the Newham and pension fund audits. No, she didn't. She only did the Newham audit. It's Kevin Suter as the audit partner for the pension fund, and he's carrying on in that role. So Stephen is only going to be doing the London Borough of Newham accounts, not the pension fund. So apologies for that.
clear, I think. Stephen, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thank you very much, Chair, and good evening. I'm clearly delighted to be working with the Council, with you as Chair and with officers. As you've alluded to, Chair, Janet Dawson has reached the end of her appointment period under professional standards, having audited for 6 years. And to observe those professional requirements, the audit has now rotated to me. I've had some initial introductory conversations with Conrad and the team, but as I say, very much looking forward to working more closely over the coming months and years with the authority.
Well, many thanks. We do look forward to working with you and pass on our thanks to Janet as well on behalf of the committee. I think I can open it up to any comments, reflections from members with the proviso that I think it's broadly material we're quite familiar with.
This is questions to the report.
This is if there's anything on item 5, but we don't suspect there will be necessarily.
I did send 3 in.
Was there anything you wanted to raise in the committee?
I think.
Did you not get those?
Yes, it's just if you felt as though you wanted to raise a quick 1 or 2.
Yeah. So it's Councillor Neil Wilson. Page 28 and 44, just in regards to the value for money, what's the progress on implementation of the remaining ICC recommendations is my first one.
Why do we actually take that now, although it will come up later when we look at the internal audit progress reports?
If a chair, I'm relaxed about it as long as we cover it somehow.
We'll take that later then, because I know that that's in item 8.
Because there's a lot of cross-referencing by definition.
Yeah.
What we simplify. The next one, if that's okay, Chair, is on value of land and buildings, page 34. I'm referring to the big numbers of the agenda pack. I hope I've got my pagination right. Has there been any actions to address the issue of challenging any changes to valuations outside of expectations? This is about the value of our land and buildings, bearing in mind that obviously land values and property values, it's not, well, like everything else, it's inexact. So,
shall I do a couple of brief introductory remarks and then bring others in? So, as you say, Chair, there's a fuller update on the ICC later in the agenda, but it makes perfect logical sense now. And Nicola Wood will perhaps come in on that item in a moment with detailed independent internal audit follow-up that's been done against that to give you the assurance. So in the broad message, from my perspective, I've always said, this is not exactly a numbers game to sort of precisely demonstrate that each and every recommendation has been exactly precisely implemented, as much as the broad thrust of what the report was about has been done. I'm confident in the progress that has been made. It is never an area that one could choose to relax in, so we'll have to keep the emphasis up. In terms of valuations, that will mainly be an issue, of course, for the accounts for the year ending March 22, and it's worth highlighting 2 points on that. I think particularly in one would expect there to be some particular focus around that, given the current inflation environment, and that may lead to some issues. It is also worth saying at a national level, there is a consultation going on about changing on a temporary basis some of the standards and processes around valuation in respect of the kind of difficulties that have been seen nationally about production of accounts at authorities other than Newham, I might add. So the requirements may change. We don't know the outcome of that consultation yet, but assuming they don't change, or indeed even if they do, we'll still have to make sure that that's properly focused on in this year's accounts. I'll pause at that point if perhaps Nicola wants to add anything on the Controls Commission, if they want to come in the accounting.
Thank you, Conrad. So we've done a second follow-up of the ICC report, and it's roughly 2/3 now implemented, 1/3 is partial. There are some outstanding areas, the performance appraisals, which is subject to an appendix in the internal audit report, which will come to you. Non-contractual spend, which is another area of focus that we're still working on. Training and delivering management reports to provide better management information. I think some of the areas that we've already marked as implemented, such as the manager's portal, is already up for another review to enhance it further. So a lot of these items are ongoing, as you would expect. You can't just say tick, it's done. It's very much ongoing, manager's portal being one. Training will be always ongoing. But I think it's a good position to be in, 2/3 done, 1/3 partial now.
thanks very much. And there's just one more, if I may, because you say there'd be 3, yeah? It's on the minimum revenue provision, page 36. What is the progress on the review of that policy? Because we said we would review it, and I think incumbent on us to keep asking the questions, at what stage are we reaching, bearing in mind all the caveats that we often have to have around this. Including the fact that government, so the consultation I referred to earlier is being run by SIPFA essentially. Government, the Department of Levelling Up, Housing and Communities, is also consulting on, or strictly speaking, the consultation closed on Tuesday on some changes to the regulations that they are considering around minimum revenue provision. So until we know the outcome of that, clearly we can't conclude a review of it because the regulations may change. I'm reminded on both answers really that we've got inflation, which obviously is on an upward trajectory, and that's about the only thing we could say. But also there's these reviews that, but might sort of moving goalpost sort of scenario. So yeah, there'll be a future discussion, but I think it's worth flagging up, Chair, that's why there might be lack of progress compared with what the timescales envisaged would have been. Okay, yep, thanks. Fiona, do you want to I'm just going to go to Fiona next.
Thank you, Chair. Page 29 on the issue of the audit certificate, it says that it's been delayed and that there are outstanding objections from prior years. Could you just give a quick update on the outstanding objections and where you are and when we're likely to have the audit certificate issued? Thank you.
Shall I turn to Stephen?
Stephen,
yeah.
I mean, but obviously I can come in as required.
So we are working through those. Clearly, the resolution of those is not purely dependent on ourselves, actually, because the objections go back some time with a view to trying to get those resolved. Certainly, I think the latest estimate, and Janet is continuing to deal with those rather than passing those over to me. The latest estimate, I understand, is by the end of March or early into April. Clearly, the other element which prevented us last year from issuing the certificate was the conclusion of the work around whole government accounts. And that's the other element that will need to be completed to allow us to conclude on the certificate as well.
Thank you. And Winston, do you have a question?
That was my question.
Okay.
That was put, but is it Fiona? Yeah, that was my question.
Brilliant. Thank you ever so much. I'll move us on now, but we look forward to working with you, Stephen, in the next set of accounts in the interim. Turning to item 6 on complaints, improvements and interactions with the Ombudsman. Can I turn to officers? It may well be Jessica to just give a couple of minutes overview.
Sorry, unmute. Thank you, Chair. Yeah, glad to be here to present this report, and my apologies once again that there was nobody to present it at the October meeting, so I was keen to come. I'd like to introduce some colleagues as well who are here to answer questions. So Valerie Pearce is our new Director of Resident Experience, who is here in sort of week 4 of her post at Newham. So she's a new arrival, new Director of Resident Experience to give a real focus to all customer and resident facing contact services, so council tax and benefits, customer contact, complaints, members' inquiries and freedom of information requests. And also John Stroud, who's the Service Development Manager for the Directorate and assists in the kind of monitoring of our performance in that Directorate. And I think what the report tries to set out sort of presents the latest Ombudsman report that we have from the Local Government Ombudsman, provides, I suppose, a kind of a bit of a back history. It's the first time that this has been presented, sort of reported publicly to members for some time. It's obviously good practice to do that on an annual basis, and that's what we'll be intending to do going forward. I think this shows an improving picture in how we deal with complaints across the piece, but one where there's still quite a significant amount of work to do. We have sort of summarised some of the activity that's underway to address that, and more recently we have a report going to the Council's executive on a new set of resident experience standards, which is guidance for staff to help them improve their daily practice in how they deal with resident contact, complaints, inquiries, etc., to really embed an improved practice right across all of the services of the council in how they deal with that contact. It is absolutely fundamental to what the council is trying to do. Performance is still too slow. My reflection from the analysis that we've done of looking at both the Ombudsman reports and the findings of those reports and our complaints practice generally is that we have a relatively, compared with our sort of basket of similar authorities, one of the lower upheld rates, which is encouraging because it demonstrates that when complaints have reached the Ombudsman and they have investigated thoroughly, they have upheld a smaller percentage and indeed number of complaints compared with other similar authorities, which shows that we are following our practices. Where we do need to get much better is on the timeliness and the responsiveness to both residents and on occasion the Ombudsman. So when that's some of the work that we're focusing on is that timeliness. There's now regular monitoring of performance on all of these sorts of inquiries and complaints and freedom of information requests at corporate management team level. It forms part of our corporate performance monitoring regime, and we're just trying to spread the message from the corporate complaints handling team right across the organisation and work particularly with those areas that are high volume areas for complaints, because we know there are different sorts of complaints. Our performance in dealing with the statutory complaints in children's and adults is reasonable. They are more complex complaints, so they do tend to take longer, and we're getting better at providing information to both the complainant and the Ombudsman as those complaints are worked through. But the high volume areas they tend to be less complex. So if they reach the Ombudsman, there's usually something more behind them. But we're working closely with colleagues in those service directorates to look at our processes and practices. And there was a workshop, for example, last week to work through in some detail end to end all of those sorts of complaints with environment sustainable transport colleagues. So a lot of work going on in this area. We have improved on previous years, but we acknowledge there's still much to do. Happy to take your questions, Chair.
Thank you very much. And I think we'll turn to Daniel for the first question. I think Daniel echoes one of sort of my concerns, which is there's a significant volume of complaints going in, and it's those processes and mechanisms to best identify ones which are going to require the most effort, ones which are likely to have the highest risk, go to the Ombudsman and so on. So Daniel, would you mind kicking us off with sort of your thoughts on triage and so on?
Yes, thanks. I mean, I'm very grateful for that introduction, actually. I think that was helpful. As you say, that there is an issue about timeliness, which you covered in your report, and I'll say I know the report includes members' inquiries. Some did in the past, very recent past, seem to disappear into a black hole rather than be late. But that does seem to be shifting, and that's good. Something that I've seen kind of asked previously, I've never had a very satisfactory response on. I don't know if you can assist now with the changes. Is the word triage. There are some things which need to be dealt with much quicker than the target for 20 days. There are certainly other things that I've made inquiries about as an elected member that I really could wait a lot longer than that. I'm quite happy to. Is there a focus on priorities beyond making sure you keep within target on that?
Yeah, would you like to go ahead, Jessica?
Again. Yes, I'll kick us off, and John might be able to maybe describe some of the process that we use. So we don't have an explicit triage policy and sort of process, but complaints are examined and considered when they come in to determine where they're best directed to. And one of the things that we've started doing to assist with that is just is reviewing where they're sent and who takes ownership for dealing with them. And so one of the things that we recognise is that some of those simpler, less complex, high volume complaints could be best dealt with more simply and quickly by the service responsible. I mean, at the moment in Newham, unlike in every authority has slightly their own way of doing it, but a perhaps more common way is for services to take responsibility for their own initial stage 1 complaints, which they should be able to just resolve. And often it's not about having a formal investigative process. It's about just resolving the issue that the resident has complained about. They just want it solved and sorted out. And so we're working with, as I say, colleagues in Environment and Sustainable Transport to pilot some of those simpler, high volume complaints, just returning to the service to deal with at stage 1. And it would only be then, if the complaint then comes back, as the complainant is not satisfied, that we would then spend more time dealing with the perhaps more complicated investigation. And that's somewhere where we think the corporate complaints team can add more value and do that. So that kind of triage, what kind of complaint is it? Is it a stage 1? Is it a simple thing? Just go to the service and get it resolved. We would then work more closely with those more complex children's social care complaints and focus our attention on those. So we've been trialling that process, and we're also working with housing colleagues on taking a similar sort of approach, because again they have a mixture of complex and just sort it sort of complaints, and so there is that degree thing. But I think it's a good suggestion for us to kind of perhaps put more of a structure around that process, and that's something we're certainly happy to take away, Chair.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly do feel that there are times where I, for example, send in something that I sense needs some urgent assessment, either because of the vulnerability of a resident or because of some health and safety aspect to it, and I don't feel that the first response, which is obviously an automated response, I'm not by that I mean formulaic response, which I don't expect a bespoke response to every inquiry as a kind of acknowledgement, but sometimes you just want someone to see, yes, this needs to be addressed, and not just read, someone will get back to you in 20 days, and it just doesn't feel very emotionally intelligent. Could I just ask a related question on the other end of the scale, which is, what does the word resolve mean? I am talking about paragraph 5.2 and marking members' inquiries resolved. Sometimes I feel that responses are half answers, they're overly literal, and you referred to the term resident experience, and I would be interested in kind of how you improve on that.
So resolved is a contested word. I completely acknowledge that, and I think we have done a fair bit of work in looking at both the system. So the system will can sometimes say an item has been resolved because we've identified the person that has said they're going to deal with it. So if it's a complaint about a street lamp being out, the resolution is that it's been allocated a job ticket and the service is committed to replacing the bulb. Now that doesn't mean that the street lamp has actually been mended, and so we recognise that that's a definitional problem, which we need to be clearer in our language. Some of that is about the system. The system just generates something that says this thing has been resolved, it's been agreed, we found a solution. It doesn't mean that the job has been closed. And so one of the things that the resident experience standards are trying to do is get a sense of ownership until resolution is concluded, and that people take responsibility for seeing the job through. And so as part of that, we want to look at some of that wording and at how we communicate what we're doing. So no, I totally acknowledge that.
Thank you. If I go next and then turn to Harvinder, perhaps. I mean, my question's around why some of the, it comes back to timeliness, why some of the cases get to the Ombudsman in this way and why the Ombudsman had to resort to the witness summons. And can I just ask, what do senior management do and what do yourself do, Jessica, in terms of monitoring SLA breaches and overall dashboard view? I mean, why does it ever get to that point, and how are senior management actually staying on top of the SLAs being breached on a regular basis?
Yeah, and they absolutely should. I mean, that the issue of the witness summons was thankfully a one-off, and we have got a detailed timeline that explains exactly how that happened and where it went and how it wasn't picked up. And it was a housing case, and we have now put in a completely different process. So all stage 2 complaints are now signed off by the Director of Housing. So they are very closely monitored, and he also, whenever an Ombudsman complaint comes in for housing, it will go to the Director of Housing for his awareness, so he is fully aware. So we have completely changed the process in housing. Housing is a very high volume, high area of concern that we've put a lot of effort into over the last year. In terms of senior management more generally, it's ever since I've been at Newham, it's had regular attention at the corporate management team. We've developed a now live dashboard that is monitored at the moment on a weekly basis at the corporate management team. There's a slot where it's gone through and we look at the red performance areas of performance where the SLAs are not being met, and try and drill down into that. And one response to a particular area of concern was the workshop that I mentioned in my introduction. So a real drilling down from the Director of Environment and myself and colleagues responsible for the services in how those processes were being used. So it's an area of very live focus, which I hope will result in the continuation of the improvements that we've started to see.
Thank you. Harvinder.
Yes, Chair, thank you. Just a quick thing on reporting. The Love Newham app, which has been set up, is actually monitored, because I know residents that put complaints there, and it's like, where do they go? Do they go to a bottomless pit? Because nothing gets resolved. And then we have to pick up some of the casework that comes along with it. And when we raise that through the Newham members portal, which we're told to use, the responses are not exactly what we're looking for. And I think Councillor Blaney mentioned the fact that, yes, we're doing bits, right? The residents feel that we're not actually supporting them. So it seems we're not getting the full story of exactly what's going on with the complaints. Yes, we do get holding messages come through and other bits and bobs, but at the end of the day, the residents are very unhappy with how things are. I'll leave it there, and maybe somebody can.
Yeah, so the Love Newham app is something it's tricky to monitor in the same way that our corporate systems will monitor the things that come through the complaints team. So we are aware that that is an area we need to look at how it's doing. And I think it was one of the things that did get flagged up in the workshop as well. So that is an area that we know we need to look at. And I'm aware that it is, I mean, that is something I've heard before from members, that they pick up a complaint that comes to a member because the other route has been tried and not used. Perhaps I can come back to the committee with a bit more information on what we intend to do with the lovely with the Love Newham app, and how the different methods that we're trying to take on board, we're trying to adopt to improve all of our tracking. And John is our master at tracking things. I don't know if you want to say a bit more about what we are trying to do to improve that, using our the CRM and the casework system.
Chair, before we get an answer from John, can I just add one other thing?
Yeah, please.
We as a council are expecting all our residents to have smartphones, have laptops, be able to go to the library and to be able to use technology. But that is not the reality.
Cut out there.
So we've
You
moved,
cut out there.
we've
You
moved
cut
along.
out. But I think we got the gist of it, and I think it's more rather than a question. I think it's a challenge. Let's not forget that not every resident can access online channels to make complaints and queries. I think was the gist of it.
Yeah, no, I accept that, and we've done a considerable amount of work on digital inclusion and improving making access available through our libraries, giving out devices, improving a whole range of things. When we developed the website, we use the system of personas to understand how people want to contact us, and that's what we intend to use across a range of our other processes. But John, I don't know if you want to add something on where we see the kind of CRM and tracking going next.
Yeah, I just wanted to add about the Love Newham app. We don't actually, in terms of volumes, we probably don't get that many complaints about the app from a complaints point of view compared with the actual volumes that there are. But we are aware that some people do have issues. And I think some of the issues, we don't track the Love Newham app ourselves within our directorate very closely. It's actually managed more in the kind of environmental area. But we have noticed that there are some complaints where people, it tacks back to the other thing you were talking about around resolved, confusions around is something resolved, you get messages through the app, it doesn't actually seem to be resolved on the street, you might get a complaint about it. When we often investigate these complaints, we actually find out that there's something in the world that hasn't happened, like somebody hasn't done something they should do, and they may have closed something down, and it's sending out an incorrect message. Now, one of the things that we want to do with the opportunity that we have, we've just upgraded our CRM, customer relationship management system, is use that to interface with the Love Clean Streets app to refresh some of the messages there so that people have got more options when they are updating the process. We haven't been able to do much work.
I think that's helpful. I think that's
a change freeze.
I think that's helpful, John.
To the new system I'm running, but with our colleagues, we are making some inroads into that in the next few months.
Thank you. And we'll just take the final point on this agenda. I think we're going to have to take questions offline on this item. If I'm going to take the last question from Fiona, but could you email the clerk any outstanding questions? We'll put those to officers and we'll publish those in the next agenda pack. So I'm sorry they're not covered tonight because we're trying to work through everything, but if you email them to Pauline, we will get them answered by the officers. But we will just have time for one final quick question from Fiona.
Thank you, Chair. It's just on point 4.10 that housing repairs is the highest level of upheld complaints by the Ombudsman. Is there any trend analysis to see how the complaints for housing repairs have been over the last 5 years? Because to see whether there's improvement or it's failing, because there have been issues with RSM. So I'm just a bit concerned at the high level that were upheld. Thanks, Chair. Thanks.
Yes, no, it has pretty consistently, certainly since I've been at Newham over the last 2 years, housing repairs has been the highest level of upheld. John has the organisational history, will know if there's been any difference, earlier than that. Again, we can maybe provide you with some data as far back as we can go. The system that we use is itself reasonably new, so some of the records are are incomplete, predating that, but we can certainly provide you with a bit more trend analysis. We have done quite a lot of work with housing repairs colleagues. They obviously have their own improvement work, on how they actually deliver the repairs. But we've done work with them on using complaints to try and do some root cause analysis to understand what is driving the level of complaints. They are now measuring customer feedback more rigorously to really understand, what is driving the dissatisfaction, where are residents happy with the repair that they've had. There's obviously a high volume of repairs, and so the level of complaints relevant to the volume of repairs themselves is relatively low, nonetheless, there is clearly a problem because of the levels of upheld. So we're working really closely with them on really understanding what lies behind it. We've made even some really simple improvements. So one of the highest reasons for complaints was people not turning up for an appointment or not rebooking, and a very simple change to the process whereby the operative would call the resident before arriving to say that they were on their way, and reduce the number of missed appointments. So there are some really simple things that we can do by drilling into the causes behind repairs. So that work will continue.
Thank you. So we'll note that as an action. And I know that we're out of time. I would encourage members to submit questions. I would say this though, if members are in agreement, I think it could be interesting to have something on members' enquiries or something back on complaints, not at the next meeting, but later in the year, and adding that to the forward agenda if members think that would be a good use of time. I think there's quite a bit of interest, so I think we'll add that to the forward agenda, if that's okay. But can I thank officers for coming? I think thank you for bringing this to us, for publishing it, for starting the conversation. And I would very much emphasise that I think it's the start of engaging us. I think we have ideas to share, and we look forward to having you back in the future. So thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
So we'll jump on to the Treasury report now. Again, I think it might be one we can wrap through fairly quickly. But can I turn to officers to introduce it? Item 7.
Chair, I'll just say a word if I may, and then we've Stephen Wild and Alison Mackey who can add to that and take any points of detail. As you say, the format of the report is hopefully fairly familiar now. Previous years, and it conforms to all the legislative requirements. In terms of process, council, as part of the budget making decision on 28th of February, this is final sign off for this, but obviously it's really helpful by the audit committee en route to that. Of course, back almost to the earlier conversation on inflation. Clearly, this is something in terms of interest rate forecast, for example, that we're going to need to be monitoring rather more closely in the year. Those are much more volatile than they've been these last 10 or 15 years, I would say. But I'll pause at that point there and hand over to Stephen and Alison to highlight anything else or to take questions.
Yeah, anything quick you want to draw out, Alison?
Yeah, just echoing Conrad's comments on interest rates. I mean, you're probably all aware that they went up last week. We're expecting them to go up to about 1.25%. That's the bank rate by the year end. But the longer rate on PWLB borrowing seems to be fairly stable at the moment.
That's helpful context. Mind if I kick us off, which is to say, if we look at sort of Annex 1, page 117, and the actual Treasury portfolio, it's a helpful summary of all of the various loans. And looking at some of the long-term debt and money market debt, what is the risk here around inflation? What amount of that debt is RPI linked and so on? And what analysis have you got on sort of worst case scenarios about RPI getting to much higher percentage figures?
Our current debt is all fixed. So there's the risk is in the Lobos being called and us having to refinance at a higher rate, but that is highly unlikely. Our advisors run, they call it a Monte Carlo scenario, and we meet with them quarterly. Those scenarios have shown that those Lobos will never be called, but never say never. Going ahead, as I just said, interest rates at the longer end seem to be fairly stable at the moment, so the risks are minimal at the moment for debt costs.
Helpful. Yeah, Narissa.
Sorry, just following on from Annex 1 in terms of the cash deposits, I don't know, has the council considered, perhaps if it, paid off 100 million, it would save obviously the council roughly about 4 million a year in interest payments. I know you said that they're fixed, but I'm just wondering if judging by the figures, it's not like they're generating huge returns. If that's been a consideration for the council to save money, given that, as the figures show, it's not generating that much money.
The interest rate environment doesn't allow us to do that. That would be very expensive. There would be a premium to pay on that debt. And it's something we do keep under constant review, but in the interest rate environment at the moment, it's really not on the cards.
Just to add to that, if I may, I think if we do start seeing a shift in the interest rates at the longer end, then possibly that might start to change. But at the moment, as Alison says, on the face of it, looking at those figures, one would think, of course, that we should be repaying debt, but the early redemption charges on those are just so high because of the difference between current base rate and the loan rate that it is to do that. So our strategy more is actually to run those cash balances lower.
Thank you.
Yeah. John.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a question about the Lobo loans. We know that the most detrimental loans have been restructured, but on page 111452, it does say that there's a dialogue with the banks on possible restructuring of the remaining Lobo loans. And I wonder what factors would influence an agreement to have these loans restructured?
I mean, again, Alison and Stephen can come in on more of the detail of this as required. Essentially, we would have to be satisfied that some such restructure was actually in the long-term benefit for the council, having the current position with what the refinance loan would look like. And again, we're in this same issue of early redemption charges that would make that difficult at the moment. But it's essentially it's the same consideration. It's just at the moment the interest rate environment, as Alison says, doesn't make that calculation add up. Alison, I don't know if you want to add to that, and then perhaps Councillor Whitworth, I'm guessing you want to come back on that point.
No, I've got nothing to add. Thanks, Conrad.
Sorry, can I just add a point to that? We do, as a matter of course, look at the long-term cash flows of the existing Lobos, and we would talk to, we have a requirement to talk to our lenders, on Lobo lenders, on proposals to do any restructuring. We would look at those restructure proposals and discount those cash flows and compare them with the existing cash flows to see if there's any value in doing that change. At the moment, there isn't, because there is such a large premium. But as I say, we're in constant dialogue with those lenders to make sure that we're still getting value.
Thank you, Stephen. I'll just sort of add, are the restructuring of these loans something that we desire, if possible, or is it something we're relaxed about keeping until the conditions become favourable?
I think it's an area that we would always keep closely under review, and more closely under review than, say, for example, the Public Works Loan Board portfolio, because of the nature of the Lobo loans. So we're not relaxed about the existing holding so much as the current interest rate climate. We're kind of so far off of restructuring being economically justifiable to recommend that we're not sort of doing massive work on it every day, because we just know we're a long way apart. But when that's not to comment on whether those loans were not good instruments at the time. It's just the current situation doesn't permit a review of it, so, or doesn't permit any sensible restructuring, as I ought to say. We keep reviewing it.
Okay, thank you, Conrad.
Winston.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Can I take you to page 108, paragraph 4.3? Where it states here, it's assumed that council will not operate with less than £100 million of available surplus cash. Although the corporate director resources may choose to operate at lower cash levels, where are we in terms of that statement at the moment?
Do you want to pick up the current?
Our cash balances at year end are estimated to be at about 140 million. So we're above the liquidity buffer amount of 100 million.
I think it's just important to emphasise for members as well. I mean, that doesn't mean that there's a sort of steady sum of that amount sitting in the bank, as it were. I mean, quite often what happens with this, the classic example one uses, we get the government grant on the 1st of the month, the payroll isn't due until the middle of the month. So, there's always a sizable cash balance being held, but it may be being held on a very short-term basis and constantly renewed. It's not that there's a sort of permanent, sum of cash sitting there. That helps to explain the position.
Nerissa, final question.
Thank you. Just on page 109, in terms of the table for capital borrowing, I guess the one for non-housing, it sort of looks sensible, but the ones around housing and regeneration, obviously that nearly doubles. I just wanted to know a bit more about that, because it seems like quite a massive jump in figures. And I guess my other point in terms of the point around external borrowing requirement, that seems like quite a large sum of money to be in debt for, the next 5 years or 3 to 4 years or whatever you want to call it. And I just wanted to know, how is that money going to be paid back effectively?
Okay, so I think the first thing to say, so that's the table, I'm sorry, I don't have the printed agenda, but that's table 1 that appears on following paragraph 4. I mean, the first thing to say about that is that table is, if you like, the calculation that reflects the council's plans. So, decisions around, what to invest in aren't made via this report. This report just deals with the plan of that, which is ultimately, of course, a matter for council and cabinet. You're right that those plans do reflect significant additional borrowing to fund regeneration projects, such as, for instance, the Carpenter's Estate, on which the council recently won a ballot, and indeed investment in housing. And those would lead to significant increases in borrowing in the short to term, and indeed the longer term as well, because over a considerable period of time. None of those schemes are approved, none of them are green lighted, unless we first have pretty robust assessment to show that they are affordable. So Carpenter's is a good example to use because it's recent and probably reasonably fresh in everybody's mind. We went through considerable assessment to look at what the costs of development would be, and housing mix was, and hence what the receipts from social housing element is to pay for development and so on, to assure ourselves that including that and the cost of financing those loans, so the interest and principal payments, would be met over the lifetime of that scheme. If you borrow the money over 50 years, hold those houses for a long period of time, it's on them for social and other housing, for example, and we have robust financial viability assessment that's affordable. We keep that under review at all times, and again, we're going to keep coming back, I suspect, to inflation and interest rates a lot, given the current climate. As inflation rises, of course, that financial model changes. As interest rates change, that financial model changes, and hence, it's a sort of dynamic scheme, and as the costs that flow from that change, so we might make adjustments to the scheme over time to make sure it stays affordable. So you're right to highlight that there is significant additional borrowing intended for that, but I think there are sound and robust processes in place to make sure that that borrowing is not entered into, or rather the schemes aren't entered into, unless we are reasonably confident of affordability. Of course, housing development has risks with it, and if you want no risk, then you don't do the scheme. But there are sound and sensible reasons to assume that those schemes will be viable, and contingency plans in place if the market moves against us, for example.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I think we'll leave it there for this quarter's update, but thank you to officers. Look forward to seeing you next time.
Thank you.
Turn to the quarterly internal audit progress report. Quite a few things here. I'll just remind members that we're, of course, coming to cyber and direct payments at the end of the meeting. We did have a little bit of a discussion earlier on ICC, but other than that, officers, was there anything else you wanted to quickly highlight at the start?
Thank you, Chair. You've highlighted the 2 exempt items already, which I was going to raise. The only other thing is that I'd like to say that to consider the report as being read and to ask members for their questions.
Anyone like to kick it off? Silence in this one instance.
I was trying to formulate a question, which is at page 3, paragraph 3.4, page 143. It talks about contracts. What I want to know, over what period of time we operated without proper contracts being drawn up?
I don't think that I can comment on that without doing further work on this area, which we are planning to do in 22-23. The audit looked at expenditure over a certain period, 1st of April to the 30th of September 2021, but obviously contractual spend could have predated that period. As I said, we're going to be doing further work on this area in 22-23.
Can I just come in on that for a second? So the report identified contracts that we couldn't locate on the contracts register. So that may indicate that contracts exist elsewhere, but for some reason weren't on the central contract register, which is currently a work in progress, as you know, and that's on the Internal Controls Commission report recommendation number 20, where we're looking at contractual spend, non-contractual spend, and to start that off, you need to have a contract register to understand what's contractual spend. So it's not a case necessarily that there were no contracts in place, it's just that they weren't listed on the contracts register. And as Nicole quite rightly says, that's the next piece of work that we're going to do in the next financial year to ascertain whether the contracts exist, but for some reason aren't on the contract register, to ensure that they went through the contract standing orders, the due process of tendering and getting value for money for them, and then also to make sure that payments were in line with the contract terms. So that's our next piece of work after that.
Thank you. I'll go next and then I'll turn to Daniel. Looking at our planned work, I know we've got Q3 of planned work in here. I'm almost skipping ahead a little bit to the risk register that we've got for children's later on, and just almost to challenge ourselves really. Does the audit plan that we've got for the rest of for the next quarter, does that reflect the emerging risks that we've got before later on in terms of children's that we're seeing? So, for example, there's a very high risk around send inspections. There's a very high risk of February inspections around MTFS types, so on and so forth. Is the have we got it quite right? The Q3 plan work in terms of the very latest risks we're seeing from children's.
So my response to that is that we have the Children's and Young People Services risk register here, and we've also obviously had the Ofsted report a while ago, and you've had regular updates on progress against that, and the corporate director and his team are here tonight to answer any questions. I very much believe that internal audit would be of little value in providing assurance over areas that we know are weak and that we know that the directorate are working on. Internal audit would be best valued that once the service has fixed the issues and put in the controls in place and are confident that that's working, the internal audit would then go along and provide assurance that the controls are working. And I think there's a point in time where we need to let that directorate get on and fix some of those issues and some of those controls, and then hopefully we'll be invited back in to then provide assurance that it is actually operating as intended. At the moment, I think in certain areas there is little value to be added for internal audit going in, and actually in some cases it would detract the team within Children's Directorate from fixing some of the issues there.
We will be continuing to follow up a limited assurance report on direct payments in the next few months, and that will be reported to the April committee meeting.
Okay, yeah, I think that question's been minuted, and I think we need to refresh ourselves of that as we see those continued children's in progress in children. I think that's almost a challenge to ourselves, but a really good point. Daniel, we'll go to yourself next.
I've got two very different ones. So the first is page 145 of the bundle, paragraph 3.15. A high priority finding has not been fully implemented, the absence of a formal market strategy, that's the audit markets. Is there any further information on what's happening with that?
We are following that up. We provided a paper, or the service provided a paper back last year on what they were planning to do, and they have a quite lengthy time scale for actually getting the strategy in place, because they want to have a proper consultation period with residents and interested parties. So they've got a target date of reporting back to CMT of May 2022. But obviously we're going to be reporting back on this audit at the April meeting as well, so I can provide you a more full response then.
Thanks. I mean, maybe more for the minutes, more than any response today. I would be curious at that stage what relationship, if any, to a strategy there is, with lots of talk in other fora around spending money in communities around kind of pop-up markets and stuff, and if there's any relationship between the two at all, because I haven't noticed one, but then there isn't a formal market strategy. Chair, I've got a totally different question, and I don't know if you want to take it now, but it's on the Appendix E on page 171.
Could I hand over to Ben Plant, who actually prepared this appendix?
Yeah, very happy to answer any questions on that particular appendix.
Okay. It's just one question really, which is I'm looking at the table on page 173 for people watching or don't have it in front of them. The title of the table is colleagues who have performance objectives for 21-22 recorded in Oracle Fusion, and of course there's lots of explanatory text about why people may not be entered there, and the process of using that. But the percentages in different directorates are wildly different. Right at the bottom, we have Brighter Futures, 13%. And I'm curious if there's any explanation for that result. In particular, notice my previous comments in this committee, no one's ever really explained to me in a way that I've understood what the actual performance objectives of Brighter Futures as a directorate is, and so I'm obviously curious if there's any relationship between the two.
So I can certainly answer the first part of that question, which is to say the appendix details some technical issues that some employees have experienced in accessing the appraisal forms in Oracle Fusion, and I happen to know that managers in Brighter Futures have been affected by that issue and have therefore not been able to access the form where performance objectives should be recorded. In relation to your second point, Councillor, about the sort of wider performance objectives for Brighter Futures, that isn't one that I would feel qualified to answer here, but I could certainly take away and arrange for a response to be provided outside of the meeting.
I mean, for me, the table that Daniel's brought us to on colleagues who've completed their performance objectives, it's pretty jaw-dropping stuff, to be honest, for this sort of size of an organisation to be sort of that low. And I know it's a new system, but is there some sort of cultural issue around performance management in the council? Or is it really confined to Oracle? Because this looks incredibly low, certainly where I work at Financial Conduct Authority. I mean, the figures here are incredibly low. Is it cultural or is it systems?
I would say it's both in my experience. So I think, you know, this is not the sort of compliance with this framework that I would want to be reporting to the audit committee, or that we would want to see within the council. Within Changing Together, which is the council's culture change programme, one of our themes is around the performance culture at the council. So that is recognised as something that we need to continue developing and working up as part of our wider culture change. And there's a lot that we've already done there to build the performance culture within the council, but its inclusion within that programme and the data you can see in the appraisal here, evidence that we've definitely got further to go. We have been hindered by the system issues this year, and this was the first year that we'd asked people to record performance objectives onto Oracle Fusion, and we were definitely significantly hindered by the absence of management information to let us see what compliance with that requirement was looking like in the system, although that has been subsequently addressed, but was not in place at the time that we began the financial year. I think if it had been, we would have been reporting different figures in this appendix to the committee this evening.
I'll go to Conrad. Did you want to follow up on that, and then I'll turn to Mike?
I mean, I agree with everything Ben said, of course, that's entirely right. But I mean, you know, just to sort of nail the issue, you know, of course, that's not satisfactory performance. No one thinks it is. There is an element, doubtless, in reality with the new system that is sort of affecting it. But clearly, that doesn't explain all of it, nor do we pretend that it is. And that is an important part of really continuing the shift in the culture. The council, that we've made some considerable progress on in many areas, but it's not yet applied nearly consistently enough across the organisation. That's something we're absolutely focusing on changing.
Great. Mike next, thank you.
We use Oracle Fusion and the Oracle appraisal in my business, and I'd say that it is pretty shockingly bad how poor the stats are. But the stats are looking at data entered into Oracle as opposed to necessarily people doing appraisals and setting performance objectives. So what's your feel for the actual amount of people in the organisation as a percentage that have got performance objectives? You talked a lot, Ben, about culture. I think that's important to understand, rather than necessarily the compliance with adding stuff to the system, which I recognise is not the easiest thing to use.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really difficult thing to quantify, to be honest. So I absolutely am aware of circumstances in the council where people have their performance objectives recorded in Word documents or in other ways because they've not been entered onto Fusion, but those conversations are happening and those objectives exist and progress is measured against them. I think the challenge really is how well can we measure that, and the measure that we want is really around being able to extract the management information from Oracle Fusion, which is one of the reasons why it is very important that managers do record that data there, because that in a way it's very difficult for us to quantify what is taking place but not recorded on the system.
So as Director of HR, do you have a feel for that at all? I know you can't quantify it specifically, but a feel for, is it a lot higher than we're seeing here in numbers, or is it a bit higher? What's your feel as the person responsible for this?
I mean, I would probably say in that kind of sense, it is somewhat higher. It is certainly not the case that it would be, as high as 80 or 90%, and that we just haven't got it recorded on the system. There are definitely, this is definitely an area for improvement within the council. It would be in reality somewhat higher than the figure that you can see in the report here.
It might be that, there's some good practice going on in the council. I see resources is much higher at 66%, and there's almost a bit of positive news story to be shared. But yeah, just a thought really. Any further? We'll take two more, and then I'll have to take questions offline. Nerissa, then John.
I agree with what Conrad said about more needs to be done. I guess my concern is that, we've been in the pandemic for quite a long time. So issues around dealing with difficult systems, there's been, couple of years to be dealing with this. So I don't think it's good enough really to say, you know, people have problems accessing the system, because, you know, unfortunately we've been in having to use, you know, IT for quite a while. And if there are major issues, you know, managers should be reporting that to IT, whoever, to say, you know, I'm not able to do this, because that's sort of a core part of their job as managers, to ensure that this is happening. But, you know, I take the comments that Conrad, you make. I'm just concerned that, you know, if this is a core part of what managers should be doing, it's not good enough to blame IT.
No, I agree, and we're not. I mean, fundamentally, the Fusion system works. You know, organisations the world over uses it. You know, so as Mike's just said, his own organisation uses it, and many others do. And you know, maybe it's not the kind of most completely user-friendly system in that sense. Everybody, I mean, it's perfectly usable. There are, as has been explained, some glitches, and some managers, you know, for highly technical reasons, just actually haven't been able to enter it into the system. But no one is suggesting that this is just a case that, you know, the system is not right, but managers are doing all the things that they need to do. As Ben says, you know, performance will be better than is shown in that table, but you know, there's a lot more to do in this area. It's not just a system point.
And it'd be great to see if, say, CMT and the really senior leaders in the council, that you'd got 100% of completing that, and then that could almost culturally cascade down and within the local team. So that could be another area to sort of cascade down.
Like to say,
yeah. Sorry, just another suggestion, because Jessica Crow spoke earlier about, you know, they have for CMT sort of like a dashboard explaining performance. Maybe something similar could be applied to ensure that sort of thing works. I think that's quite good.
We do indeed have that, and it's circulated monthly. So managers have got the information available to them to see, you know, which of their staff have and have not carried out appraisals, or sorry, to be more strictly accurate, have and have not recorded appraisals collected on the system. So the management information is there to do it, you know, including so a manager can, you know, ask of their staff, well, have you actually done it? You know, perhaps there is a technical issue for them in the system that needs to be corrected, or to just determine where managers simply haven't done what's required. That exception reporting is in place.
Thank you.
Last question from John.
Yeah, I've got a question on Appendix A, page 147. It's related to the all staff roadshows on the council's aims and objectives, because it's reported that 70% of the attendees stated that they had a better understanding of the Towards a Better Newham strategy. Now, it seems to be reported as a sign of success, but I was wondering, what about the other 30%? I mean, were these roadshows judged to be successful in communicating the aims and objectives? Because 70% seems to me to raise a doubt, really, rather than being a positive sign.
Do you want to say that one?
Shall I start that one, and Ben may want to add to it? I mean, you know, one would want it to be 100%. It's never going to be 100% in any organisation. You know, if you carry out staff roadshows and then ask staff for feedback on it, you know, there will always be some people who feel that they wanted to know more or less, or have the information in a different format or whatever. You know, I'd like it to be a bit higher than 70%, but being realistic, you know, my sense is that's not a bad satisfaction rating for something like this, especially that had to be done. You know, we had planned for them to be in-person events that I think are more sort of inclusive for this kind of information sharing, and had to shift them online at relatively short notice, where we were in the pandemic at that point in time. Ben, I don't know if you've got any other sort of comparative information on that, but my sense would be 70%, you know, is a good figure to build on. It would be nice to have it higher, but you know, it's never going to be 100%.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Ben, do you want to add to that? Or?
No, I agree with all of that.
Well, let's leave it there, but thank you, particularly to Nicole, for, again, what was a really clear report. So
thank you, Chair.
Let's jump on to item 9, and I think this can be fairly quick because I think we're very, very familiar with the counter fraud work. I think I'm passing over to Nick. I think there's been some good work done actually in terms of putting the word out in Newham Recorder. I've seen some articles recently, so perhaps if we just quickly touch on that, Nick.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. taking the report as read, as said, there was a couple of points I just wanted to raise. One being that, yes, we did have a successful criminal prosecution in relating to subletting, and that was reported both on obviously the NUM website, and it was also in the NUM recorder. And during the month of the back end of last year, we had International Fraud Week, which not only did that go out slightly after, but we also had kind of regular tweets and posts on Facebook, things like that, to try and generate some more engagement with residents in terms of what we do, and trying to get the word out that we are kind of there and available for referrals in. So pleased with the criminal prosecution, and pleased that that story was kind of out there in the wider public. Also just wanted to, obviously we do work in quite a live environment, so the figures that are produced on there are kind of more or less always going to be not quite up to date. So just wanted to say that those figures are kind of looking probably, you know, in terms of the total notional saving, that they're kind of at least double what you're seeing in front of you. So just in case there wasn't any questions relating to that, I can say the figures are a lot higher, but it's just when we put the papers into the time we come to the meeting, there's a bit of a delay. So happy to take any questions on what's in front of you.
Yeah, we'll just take one or two, maybe just, yeah, yourself, John?
Just a reflection. It was well done to the team to obtain this prosecution, which was publicised in the NUM recorder. But my reflection is we're told the penalty that the Forster received, and then it seems from the article, whose link you've given, suggests that he was renting the property between 2007 and 2020. So my reflection was, how much money did he make during that period?
Yes, I mean, in terms of the money that we can obtain back, the unlawful profit orders would have only been able to go back to when the Act came in, which would have been 2013. And then it's obviously about us being able to demonstrate how much money is actually made on top. So that's kind of how it's figured. And then the judge can also make allowances depending on other monies that have either come and gone. So it's perhaps not reflected of the full amount, but it's the full amount that the judge was willing to award on the day.
It's had the council's hands, of course. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No further questions? Well, thank you, Nick. Yeah, some positive work there.
Thank you.
To the risk register quarterly update, and I think we're definitely starting to get a feel now for this continued positive journey in terms of risk management from the council. Nicola, did you want to say one or two things to start us off?
Certainly, thank you, Chair. You're quite right. This is now, we're nearly a year in to the journey on risk, and hopefully the committee is now familiar with the corporate risk register, which is presented here again. Is familiar with us bringing directorate risk registers, and we have the Children's and Young People Services this quarter, and also with the one-page risk profile, which this is the second time we've brought that, and you can now start to see some of the movements in the risks over time. So this particular quarter, we see one new risk going in, which is risk 20, and we've already discussed global inflationary pressures, and this risk really looks at how that will impact on the council directly. So increased energy prices, increased consumable prices, but I'm sure that members are very cognizant of how it will impact on you and residents in both the increase in energy, increase in interest rates, and increase in just their daily inflationary pressures, and how that's going to impact indirectly onto the council to deliver some of those residents' needs as they really feel the pinch. A couple of other risks have moved around. Risk 15, risk 11 have decreased as we've seen additional controls going in place. And risk 18 I've put as increased, which is the LATCO's governance. And I've put that in specifically because of, as the members are aware, we now have a up-to-date local code of corporate governance. And one of those issues is transparency of governance. So it really wants to reflect how decision-making and the governance structure operates which for this, the LATCOs in this particular example wasn't there. So we were looking to increase that transparency, the documentation of decision making and the escalation process, which is why that has temporarily moved up, but I'm sure will be addressed going forward. So any further questions on either the one-page risk profile or the corporate risk register or the Children's and Young People Services Directorate risk register?
Have we got an officer to speak to the Children's risk register?
Tim's here.
Yes, we have Tim.
Tim with us.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, Chair.
Hi, Tim. Who'd like to kick us off? Daniel, would you like to start?
Thanks. You mentioned, sorry, what do I call it? Row 18, item 18, sorry, lost my thread. But on number 18, which is page 197, you just referred to, it talks about a project plan is being prepared and a cabinet paper is being drafted. Do you have any information on the timescales for that, when a cabinet paper might be coming and when a project plan that's being prepared will be done?
I'll hand over to Conrad because he will say.
I mean, the fundamental issue for Juniper, is that in line with the council's policies, it's committed to paying, for example, London Living Wage and proper local government pensions to staff, and essentially it operates in a market characterised by minimum wage. Its principal business is school catering, and most of the schools tend to award contracts very much on price, and therefore Juniper, not surprisingly, struggles competitively in that market. Probably important to say that's not exactly a feature of it being a company, so much as it being a feature of the council's policy there that we gain very significant social benefit. Understand that there is something like £4,000 per full-time employee in terms of the benefit they receive from those policies. Obviously, there's an expense for the council, and we need to make sure that we can continue to operate that. That feeds through into Juniper's finances. The exact timing of the cabinet paper is yet to be determined because we haven't concluded our work on that, and obviously there is the matter then of the pre-election period coming up, and exactly when we could propose cabinet on that. I think the best answer I can give in terms of the exact timing is fairly soon, next few months, at absolute most, because we do need to make sure that the financial position there is stabilised, so we can continue to deliver the benefits those policies bring.
I go next on Children's risk register on Appendix 2, and then it'd be great to invite some other members into that as well. I'm looking at CYP4, the fourth risk on there, death or serious harm to a child that would have been in receipt of council services. Controls, ongoing delivery of statutory duties. I mean, that doesn't seem like a control really. And then question for Tim really is, control risk rating high, is that really the level of ambition that you have? Are we really certain that that should not be one of the lowest risk rating that we're targeting in the whole council, never mind high? So really challenging you on the controls and target around this one, and certainly how it's articulated here, it really jumps out quite uncomfortably, I think, to sort of a little bit of a lay reader like myself.
Thanks, Chair. I take your point in terms of how it's articulated, and very happy to take any comments and look at redrafting if that's helpful. I mean, I think it's a recognition that you can't eliminate risk in children's social care. You can do an awful lot to mitigate against risk, but you can't eliminate it. And I think it's a truth. It's a very difficult truth. But in Newham, we have a significant number of young people who are at risk of contextual
safeguarding issues, so issues outside of the home. And although there is a multi-agency, multi-system approach to reduce risk, you know, I could not sit here and say I've eliminated that risk and that risk is not still high in Newham, because it is high. So very happy to articulate that differently, Chair, and certainly we can add, I think, more detail on that that commentary column that gives a bit of a clearer idea of the strategies and approaches that are being implemented to reduce and mitigate risks wherever that's possible. But I think there is still a high risk that children will come to harm.
And just to build on that, do you think we're sufficiently encapsulating that in the overall corporate risk register? I'm just looking for it now. And I don't think anyone's in any disagreement as to the acute nature of this. Does it have the prominence on the main corporate risk register? And if it doesn't, do you want to take away and think about the scoring, how it's reflected? If you think it should be on there, it should be escalated as one of the council's main risks, as you put it, Tim. Just how does it sit within the council's overall risk register, and is it quite calibrated right?
Yeah, no, I think clearly it's a number 9, but it's whether or not we, as you say, Chair, we've brought children's, adults, brighter futures risks there together.
Yeah.
One question that I might discuss with Nicola is whether we have a specific risk on particularly the contextual safeguarding issues, which are factors that are harder to control than risks within a family.
I'll go to Mike and then Neil. Thank you.
I think Luke covered off my main point, which is the level of detail and some of the logic in this really needs looking at. You know, CYP1, by having an improvement board, you've reduced the impact of the risk from very high to low. So not the likelihood, that remains low, but you've gone from very high to low, and you just said to us elsewhere you can't eliminate risk in children's services. So I think we've got to think about the logic here of what's being said and whether the overall risk kind of framework that's been council's been put in place has been applied appropriately. You know, particularly the level of control that's detailed. If a member of the public, and I pick this up, doesn't give me any assurance that actually there is controls in place to do anything that is controlling the risk. Delivery of statutory duties, one that Luke's picked up. But my question was more about how you then communicate these risks into your team and how confident you are that across Children and Young People's Directorate, that people understand the risks and are contributing to reducing those strategic risks. And so could you describe to us how you communicate this, how it's embedded in your management practices, and how you identify new risks within the directorate from the ground up?
Yeah, no, sure. It's I'm really confident that we communicate risks within children's services really effectively. And the reason why I'm so confident is because we've got a very, very strong focus on service improvement and responding and managing risk, and that's our day-to-day business. Although I absolutely accept the inference in the question, which is there isn't sufficient detail in some of these control column comments, there is a huge amount of detail elsewhere about how we are responding to and managing risk. And whether that's about the quality assurance system that we have in place to review the quality of practice, whether it's about the mechanisms for auditing, for reviewing performance, for ensuring that correct risk assessments are in place in the work that goes on. There is a significant amount of scrutiny in every area of children's services, and that is all reported up through both directorate meetings, a practice and outcomes meeting that the Director of Operations chairs every fortnight, or the improvement focus meeting that I chair every fortnight, or the the externally chaired improvement board that takes place every 6 to 8 weeks. We also are subject to very regular scrutiny from Ofsted. So because of all those measures, and again, I appreciate you might feel we should be articulating that more strongly or in a more detailed way in this document, but there is a very, very significant amount of scrutiny in terms of practices across children's services. And I think there's a very acute understanding of the risks that we work with and are managing.
Can I ask one more question, Luke? Could that be all right? So of the 1 in 5 of your team who do have performance appraisals, if we look to those with objectives, would they align with performance improvements to reduce the risk? So is there a correlation between the objectives you're setting for your team and reducing risk within the directorate?
Yeah, so the 1 in 5 that are recorded on the Fusion system, I think you absolutely would see that correlation. You know, that's our business. Our business is risk. That's what we do day in, day out. And, you know, improving services to reduce risk is, you know, the essence of everything we do. So yeah, objectives are about improving performance, improving quality, and therefore reducing risk.
Neil, I think I said I'd come to you next.
Thank you. We made reference, well, my colleague Daniel Blaney did, to the interface, I think is the best word for it, between CYPS, Children and Young People Services, and Brighter Futures. CYPS risk register, CYP5 on page 200 of the main bundle refers in the comment column about monitoring KPIs and analysing data and reviewing thresholds, because we've spoken in other fora, Tim, you know, that demand is unpredictable. It's like adult social care. We know demographic trends, but these are sometimes cases of greater complexity that by definition need more children's social work involvement or multi-agency teams. My concern, Chair, is that the statement at the front door, I presume that, you know, means, you know, at the first early prevention stage, that we might be working better with outside agencies in multi-agency panels, but not necessarily getting that interface between children and young people services and Brighter Futures. Because it says ensure caseloads are reviewed regularly. One of the things that historically has been on this, because of temporary staff, that we've had increasing caseloads, and then there's been the management issue. So it's about a similar theme to what I think Mike and the Chair were saying about how this translates as a document that is both making certain that we're getting that transitional work in internal structures right, when we're also needing to get information, and particularly sensitive, quick information between agencies that we have to work with. I refer particularly to the police or health, for instance, if it's an urgent case review. Does that make sense where I'm going with this? It's about the communication.
I think with
internal
comment, yeah.
I think, you know, I don't know whether you can comment now or whether it be a follow-up on.
Yeah, we'll note it as a comment, I think. Thank you. And we'll go to Fiona, if we may.
Thanks, Chair. Hi, Tim. It's just to follow up on CYP4. You put the control ongoing delivery of statutory duties. Do you go above your statutory duties?
Yeah, yes, we do. I mean, clearly we're in part measured against whether we're carrying out the statutory duty, but I think you're right, that only sort of describes the minimum requirement. We spend a lot of time, and I don't want to take up too much of the committee's time, but designing our approach to supporting children and their families, you know, 90% of whom are in need because of a whole range of social and economic factors. A small percentage have, you know, some very serious risk issues that we need to intervene and try and resolve. And we've invested, because of where Newham Children's Services found itself in 2019, in the receipt of an inadequate grading from Ofsted. You know, since I sort of joined later that year, I've been very much keen to really try and transform the way we deliver services. So we've developed a practice model. We've brought in a clinical director with a clinical team, and that's about bringing in systemic approaches to social work. We've recently introduced a practice development social worker role, and we've got 5 of those who are supporting and coaching and embedding the new practice model. And we're starting to see some real benefits. And Councillor Wilson mentioned caseloads. They've reduced dramatically, and we're starting to see and celebrate many more examples of good practice. So you know, I'm not here to deliver an adequate service. My aim is to deliver a really exceptional service we can all be proud of.
And sorry, Chair, just one other point on CYP7 about lack of a suitable accommodation provision. Can you just give a bit more detail, because there have been some press reports of children in unsuitable accommodation and being put at risk. I just want to be clear that Newham isn't involved in any of those things, and what Newham is doing to ensure that children aren't put at risk in accommodation.
Yeah, no, of course. So this is about the sufficiency of accommodation or provision within the borough or within the close environs. So one thing that we've recognised is over a number of years, the commissioning and development of suitable provision in the borough had not had the attention it deserved over the last couple of years, and looking into the future, we are through that sufficiency board really trying to ensure we are developing appropriate provision that ensures we can match children and young people with the right quality and sort of care that they need. And that ranges from developing our in-house fostering service, so we've got more Newham foster carers to care for our children and young people, to developing move-on accommodation, so young people who are leaving our care, who are prepared for independence, can move to appropriate accommodation nearby. And we're also involved in a lot of collaboration commissioning work, both through North East London, but also now there's a growing momentum of some pan-London commissioning work, with a recognition that, you know, we don't have all the answers to these problems just within Newham. Actually, we need to work with neighbouring and regional authorities to develop those.
Thank you. Can I make a suggestion? I don't know when it is, but as you make that transformation, Tim, through CYPS, we see that risk register evolve, and we've made some reflections on it tonight. And that's just because we want to really see that risks are detected, recorded, escalated, embedded, and ultimately fed up through the council's risk management framework as a whole. So I think we'd love to see that risk register and that journey that you go on with your transformation more broadly, but also with how you're considering risk. So I think we'll come back to you again in due course. So I think we'll leave it there for the discussion on the risk register, because we do receive it every quarter, but I think that was we covered a lot there, and thank you for officers for that. So item 11 is the year ahead forward plan for noting. We've touched on a few things tonight, but we are coming to the end of the year. Hopefully we won't need another meeting because we're making good progress. Any reflections? So the next meeting would be for 13th of April. Do we know what that's going to be likely here again? Okay, brilliant. And then that takes us on to agenda item 13, which is a note in effect, a resolution to exclude the press and public in order for us to discuss exempt items around, firstly, cybersecurity, and secondly, issues in relation to direct care payments. Can I receive a proposer and seconder to enable us to go into that session? And we've got the votes and sufficient proposers and seconders in the room to be able to do that. So I think that means we now close the public session, end the streaming and move into an exempt session. Thank you.